Thank you all for being here today. This is really exciting because we have Randy Hayes and Diane Moss who work together to change the law in California through Renewables 100 to mandate 100% energy through renewables by 2024. So it's 2045, by 2045. And so they'll both be speaking, and I'm really delighted to have you both here. This is really an honor and a privilege for all of us to be able to hear from both of you, because I have known Randy since the mid-'80s. Randy is a major doer. I've always been so impressed with him. He started the Rainforest Action Network very soon before I met him. I met him like maybe a year or two into the Rainforest Action Network. And I would be thrilled every time I went to their fundraisers in San Francisco. Every time they would give a report on their most recent campaign, and it would be turning around like Burger King and Home Depot and Disney and the World Bank and Chase Bank and Wells Fargo. Every time it was a whole campaign that they were doing that turned these major corporations and organizations from non-sustainable policies to sustainable policies. I was just so thrilled, and through the years they just kept escalating what they were doing. And Randy, within a couple of years, went from just some guy to someone who was considered one of the major organizations, which he should be. He's highly respected. He was called the pit bull for the environment. Yeah, by the Wall Street Journal. So yeah, he's been in the game for a long time. He worked for 10 years with the Hopi Elders, and then he started Rainforest Action Network, and then for 7 years he worked in Green City government, working with Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown as president of the Commission on the Environment, with zero waste ordinances and green building ordinances. He worked in Washington, D.C. for 15 years for the World Future Council, and then set up Foundation Earth for developing new strategies and approaches for a sustainable world. And so I'm really happy to introduce you to my dear friend and colleague through the years, Randy Hayes.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you all for coming today, and I don't know that I'll need the microphone, so I'll keep it around here, and if you can't hear me, let me know. But I can generally project to an audience like this, and so, again, thank you for caring enough for coming to hear about this.
Is this recording okay, Mark? With somebody's voice?
I think the microphone would be good.
Yeah. Just, put it
on the
stand and put it in front of you.
All right, but I shall carry on with a decent voice while he sets that up.
Yeah.
Again, it matters to me that you care enough about these issues that you wanted to come on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. But what a great place to be on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in Shangri-La itself. And a special thanks to Kathleen for hosting this event for us. I'm going to use a bit of notes, which I don't typically do, but some of this is new material. But I also found that if I use my notes, I don't get into what I think are really interesting tangents, and all of a sudden my brief remarks are a long talk. And haven't we all been tortured enough at these kind of gatherings when the talks go on too long? So there you have it. Recently, really a few days ago, I rewatched the Adam McKay film Don't Look Up with DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. I'm sure many of you down here in Southern California have seen that. And as you know, it's mostly about this existential crisis for life on Earth, right? And indeed, a big comet is heading directly for the planet. And very, very quickly, profit motives and political dynamics rally to undercut any effective action of the existential crisis, right? But eventually, the truth gets out about reality of the situation, And the people around the world really begin to take action and react, but not really in a constructive way, right? And then there's a whole effort to silence DiCaprio, who's a scientist in the movie, right? And he finally sort of breaks out of frustration ferociously on television and basically says, we should have solved the crisis when we had time. We should have diverted the crisis when we had time. And the comet hits. Right, so here we are now in 2060, 26, is it?
26.
And we have our own existential crisis, right? And so we kind of have to ask ourselves, is it too late? Well, a friend of mine, a kind of famous Canadian evolutionary biologist named David Suzuki, who did a lot of television up in Canada, was asked to give a talk, Is It Too Late? And the bottom line on his talk was essentially, we humans are not smart enough to know if it's too late. And so we have to try, right? And so how do we navigate these sort of dark waters? Well, another Canadian friend of mine, probably the best economic ecologist that I know on the planet, William Rees, once counseled the social change movements and the environmental movement of the world, as well as myself. He said, quit talking about what you want. Talk about how you're going to get it.
Yeah.
So that's what we're really here to do today, is talk about how we're going to sort of get a better world, right? And a few clarifying remarks before I really jump into that. And one is just to go on record and say, look, my primary interest is getting industrial humanity's foot off the throat of nature. That's my personal main focus. That doesn't take care of everything that's really needed and all the different issues or related issue areas, and particularly it doesn't take care of a lot of short-term human needs. But other people can and are working on those things. And so that's good, because those are also important issues. But I'll take a kind of quick, 15 minutes, I think, to summarize the idea of a campaign to get industrial humanity's foot off the throat of nature. And then we're going to really have a vibrant, I hope, Q&A. I'm ready for some tough questions. Don't be shy about any tough questions, because if I don't have a decent answer, then I haven't learned enough or done my homework enough, and maybe that'll be the learning curve for me today. So jump into it, But I'm going to mention 5 specific sort of societal changes, but all of it in this campaign idea is really meant, it's not so much about achieving these 5 things, but it's really about getting humanity to reflect a reverence for nature in their view of the world, to realize that humanity is nature and that separation from it is an illusion. And if we don't really accomplish that, then I don't think we're really winning what we need to win. So I will also be talking about money today. But here's the Saturday afternoon good news. You can put away your checkbooks. I'm not asking anybody for anything today in terms of that. But I do want to talk about money from the standpoint of what I think is needed to really set off and popularize a campaign of the size and consequence that I'm about to go into. So all of that said, I also wanted to let you know that many of the components of this are already thought out, and some of them are in practice. And so we are not really starting from zero. And we have a kind of specific target, though it's a big target, in mind, and that has to do with the planet's 20 biggest economies, or what's known as the G20. You've heard of the G7, but the G20 is essentially virtually all of the industrial north, but it also includes India and China. And they have to be included in the solution in a major way, or we're not going to really get the job done. So, to me, shifting humanity to a better world really requires, as I've kind of mentioned, a campaign for nature. Well, why would that be? Wouldn't we want all political parties to care deeply about nature's needs? nature's needs is not a special interest group, like a lot of other things, in fact, are special interest groups. But there is no vibrant economy, or there is no social equity on a near-dead planet. And so nature's needs we could think of as kind of first amongst equals. At least in my mind, that's how I think about it. And it's just simply not okay for us 8 billion people to be killing our host, right? It's not good. We know it's not good. But it's happening on our watch. It's happening on my watch. It's happening on your watch. And so here we are. We need to do something about it. And really, saving nature is, in fact, saving humanity, right? Because we are nature. Separateness is an illusion, and people, many, many more people need to realize that. So building a better world also, I think, requires, to live up to Bill Reese's adage or advice, we need good roadmaps that really show more specifically how we're going to get the job done. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today. And I'll start off really around 5 societal systems that I think can get us most of the way to a better world, an ecological civilization, right? And so it also additionally buys us time to deal with the many other needs on the planet that are also important and legitimate. So what are these 5 societal systems that need to be transformed, right? Well, it's certain parts of the economic system itself. It's the energy consumption system, which is different than the energy production system. That's the 3rd system, the energy production system. And it's the agricultural production system. And the 5th one is really the planet's life support or habitat system that's deeply injured. So when I talk about certain parts of the economic system, what I mean by that is a focus on the reduction of government subsidies to all extractive industries. Extractive industries like oil and gas extraction, hard rock mining, metal mining, but also old growth logging and overfishing the world's oceans. A lot of them are getting public subsidies, right? And so a lot of them would actually not be profitable without those subsidies. And without those subsidies and without profitability in the world of business, things change. A lot of bad activity shuts down, and that's a good thing for Mother Earth, right? So with the energy consumption system, most of what we hear about is the energy production system, right? But the energy consumption system, like, we're in an emergency. We got to stop using energy for wasteful stuff. Throwaway culture. We can't afford that at this point in time. But most climate change and renewable energy groups are not really focused on putting a lid on energy consumption, but we are in this campaign. With the energy production system, absolutely, we need 100% renewable energy. I think we've figured that out, and that has one of the better roadmaps on how to actually get to that. The 4th system is the agricultural production system, and that's essentially shifting to 100% ecological farming, the end of industrial agriculture. The number 1 cause of species extinction is industrial agriculture. So much of the damage to the ocean, the 400 dead zones where the big rivers dump into the ocean, those dead zones are caused by industrial agriculture. So that's a fundamentally important one of these 5 systems. The 5th one I mentioned is the planet's life support or habitat system. And that's really about saving the web of life, right? That we are a strand in that web of life. We depend on that web of life for our veritable survival, right? So we've got to protect habitat, and we've got to foster a lot of rewilding and reforestation. And one of the particular plans that I'll mention in a minute is looking at how do we reforest enough to get back to the level of forest we had on the planet in the year 1900. The sequestering of that much carbon really helps us get to what we want to get to. But of these 5 systems, I mentioned how important roadmaps are. It's not just about the goal of ending industrial agriculture. How are you going to do that? But I would hazard that only about 2 of these 5 systems have really good roadmaps already, and others have pieces of them, but not really good. And so that work needs to be done, and that's part of what we'll be talking about and campaigning on. But how does one make all of these things happen? Because that's a big deal, what I just laid out, these 5 system changes, right? Any one of them alone feels kind of insurmountable, but all 5 of them? Well, I think a lot in terms of the responsibility of each of the major continents, the planet, right? So think right now, a quick run through them, right? We've got North America where we sit today, right? But South America will want to do things a little bit differently. Europe has its own dynamics. Africa has its dynamics. Asia has its dynamics. But there's kind of a 6th continent, so to speak, and that's the major islands of the world, including Australia. So I'm thinking eventually that there would be 6 different campaign plans, but all of them would embrace the need to deal with these 5 system shifts that I mentioned, right? And we have 4 specific kind of campaign strategies in mind around this, and they're things that you're familiar with. One is bottom-up campaigning, on-the-ground groups pressuring the nation-state governments, the G20 governments, right, and calling for these kind of policy changes. But another one is the top-down work. Both are really quite fundamentally important, and in certain places like Europe, there's still room for a lot of top-down good work. There's still influence that people have to influence that. So both of those things have to happen. But there's an additional strategy of consequence, and that has to do with suing the 50 to 100 largest polluters on planet Earth. And that work has been thought out, particularly by not just Friends of the Earth International in I think over 50 countries, but Friends of the Earth Netherlands in particular, that has a lawsuit going on right now with Shell Oil Company that really, to me, looks quite promising in many respects, right? So you've got those things, the bottom up, the top down, you've got the lawsuits, but there's a 4th component of great consequence, and that all of that work would be encompassed in a major public relations campaign. And this major public relation campaign is meant to help make heroes out of the groups and the lawyers doing those other things. But it's also meant to really reach outside the choir. Absolutely, all of that work needs to reach convincingly outside of the choir to help them realize that nature's needs is a general interest that we all need to embrace, right? And so that public relations campaign and outreach campaign will also get us tens of millions of people per sort of 6 continental areas, right? Hopefully working in concert and helping to build the people power that we're going to need to make all of this stuff happen. But also want to kind of remind you that there are about 10 major economic and environmental summits that happen every year somewhere on planet Earth. About 5 economic systems like the World Economic Forum and whatnot, and about 5 other environmental summits, and I can go through the list a bit later if necessary. But imagine that almost every month we have, say, full-page ads in something like the Financial Times. The captains of industry still read the Financial Times on a regular basis, right? A lot of high elected officials read something like the Financial Times. And so imagine one idea we have is 30 full-page ads in the Financial Times the day before each of these 10 summits, but year after year after year, all putting forth the idea of this kind of campaign so it becomes part of the global narrative and the global dialogue. But we also, at all of those 10 gatherings, we have a big presence. We have hundreds of on-the-ground volunteers going to every bulletin board and peppering it with copies of the ad, right? Talking to the journalists. At all of these 10 gatherings, there are hundreds and hundreds of journalists that are there. It's a great concentration and a great opportunity. And the activists can be the ambassadors for the campaign, educating the media in a major kind of way, which means the media will then be asking tough questions to the captains of industry and the high elected officials of the various nation states of the G20 and such. And so all of this will really need to be done in partnership with a lot of existing coalitions and existing networks. And we've put a lot of thought into that. But these need to be groups that embrace the basic idea of the 5-point strategy here, the 5-point system shift, right? They don't need to be working on all 5 of them, because agricultural groups are going to stick with their work in agriculture. Renewable energy groups are going to stick with that work, and understandable. But we want them to at least formally and publicly embrace this larger effort to get to a better world, right? And so at the top of this list of partnerships, there are about 5 groups that I'm just about to mention that all have similar packages to what I've already just described to you today. Quite similar packages. One of them has 5 system shifts, and it focused on the G20. And I only learned about it after I wrote my speech about that 3 years ago, right? But it's just kind of common sense in many respects that a lot of us would begin to get to the same level of what needs to be done to confront this existential crisis. So top of that list is actually a group that has the Global Justice Project out of Paris, France. It only just recently came out, but you may know one of the key authors, or know of a key author. His name is Thomas Piketty, and a couple of years ago, he had a major report on the collapse of civilizations that was caused by the inequity of income distribution. And he laid out a lot of data around that, and it got a lot of acclaim at the time. And that's from a group of economists that have a think tank called the World Inequality Lab out of Paris, right? And so they've come up with a quite similar formula to my own work. Another one is called Eco-Civilization, and that actually started at Claremont Colleges here in California around an ecological civilization, and they published a book about that. And then just a few weeks ago came out with another book by the same title, Ecological Civilization. And they have their own global network, what they've been working with for several years on launching this kind of a campaign to achieve an ecological civilization. The third one actually comes out of the Club of Rome that some of you will know about. It's been around for about 50 years. Not well known in North America, but quite well known in Europe and other parts of the planet, right? And they have something called Earth for All, and it's a survival guide for humanity. That's the one with their own 5 system shifts in the G20 also, right? And so a fourth one is called the Great Transformation Campaign. This started at TELUS Institute, a think tank out of Boston many years ago, and was initially the Great Transformation Initiative. And then last year they decided, okay, enough of their think tank. She says it's got to now shift from an initiative to a campaign. And they're currently based in both Brussels and in Boston to get going on that. The fifth one I'll mention is actually a public relations firm out of London called New Society. And this is a London-based group that already has designed many of the components of the major media campaign that I foresee that needs to happen, right? And it's run by a woman named Frankie Oliver, who's really quite inspired and has, in particular, quite a number of specific ways to really harness the deep emotional concern of the women of planet Earth, and as part of her campaign. But there are many other groups that I'll just quickly rattle off here. There are green chambers of commerce around the planet, like ASBN, the Association of Sustainable Business Network, or SVN, the Social Venture Network. So there is a business community that one can link to. There's Friends of the Earth that I mentioned, and Friends of the Earth Netherlands that did all of this work on the suing the 50 to 100 largest polluters. But in Indonesia, there's an inspired group called the Tenure Facility. There's the Buckminster Fuller Institute. The World Resource Institute in Washington, D.C. is the largest environmental think tank on planet Earth. Third Act with Bill McKibben helped start. Pachamama Alliance, that many of you know from here in California, has their Earth Shot initiative that really wants to go big. There's things from the past, like the Earth Charter International, that really has a global network and has really effectively done an environmental or an ecological constitution for planet Earth that is very well written and very thought out. And there are many, many others. But let's get to the issue of money and the needs about money around this. I have certain benchmarks in mind, and one of them is just the initial $1 million to create a starting pot. And that's followed by a benchmark of $10 million. But then on top of that, another $100 million is needed for other specific activities that I'll briefly mention today. And then the $500 million that gives us the longevity to keep pounding the message across. With that level of funding, we can make noise. We can make ourselves heard. We can punch above our weight, so to speak. And that's what Rainforest Action Network was able to do when we launched that in 1985. So with this starter pot of $1 million, we'll really just effectively use that around the power of convening people. We need to get the right set of people in the room, and we need to build the camaraderie around doing this together. And that's, while it's no easy feat, there is, in fact, a lot of coalition work and camaraderie in the social change movements that many people are not aware of, and particularly in the environmental movement. With $10 million, we can aggressively start funding these on-the-ground campaigning efforts and launch the public relations initiative that will begin to shift this global narrative that I mentioned, right? And part of that global narrative is saying, look, if we do all of this right, and particularly in accord to the detailed plans of these major groups that I listed initially go, then we have a fighting chance to stabilize the global warming at somewhere between 1.7 and 1.9 degrees. And there are sort of detailed charts on how that could be accomplished, not at all guaranteed, but we should fight for it. And then the subsequent 75 years, one of the plans has us reforesting back to the level of forest the planet had in the year 1900, as I mentioned, right? And so that work has all been thought out, and there's a lot of details around it. With the $100 billion mark, then that really means that we can be highly supportive of these other continental efforts and the one for the oceans, which is, fundamentally important because they're going to need that. That will be startup money for them, right? And then at the $500 million mark, as I mentioned, it gives us the staying power to keep pounding this message through, which, as any campaigner knows, is critical to the success of the campaign. You can't let up, right? And so regarding any specific steps over the next year or two, of course, we've got to meet with high net worth individuals and start to assemble these different benchmark pots of money. And that is likely actually to start in Connecticut and Wall Street because of some particular contacts that we have and people that will sit us down in front of some of these high net worth people. Now, as all of you probably know, it's no easy feat to get do-good money out of Wall Street or the Connecticut hedge fund crowd. On the other hand, there's a subset that are getting increasingly panicked at a kind of solar plexus level that we are in desperate straits, and we need to do something big about this, right? So, so with that initial startup pot, we would also host about several sort of half-day sessions where we would get key policy decision makers and influencers and funders together around this campaign. But this coming November in Turkey is the next annual UN Climate Summit, right? And we've already put out to the main groups there that we want to have a half to three-quarter day session where they each educate each other about what their plan is about and how they intend to expand it. And I would hope build the camaraderie that we can work together to make this happen for all of those different efforts, right? And then next year we're thinking of two specific gatherings, maybe just a day long, one in Northern California and one in Southern California, and that's largely about working on the plan for North America, right? And beginning to get our act together. And so that's on the books because that happens to be where we live. So we got to get going on that. In late 2027, we would likely convene here in North America 5 separate 1 or 2 day long conferences on each of the 5 system shifts. So we would be getting the subsidy fighting groups together, the sort of energy conservation groups together, the 100% renewable energy groups together, the agricultural groups together, and the biodiversity protection and habitat groups together to begin to build greater camaraderie amongst those movements, right? And so, but at some point when we have the $10 million, then we can really start hosting gatherings in the other continental areas, right? And so what I'm trying to convey is that all of this campaign has a major offense, right? And it's not just a defense. An offense means that we stand for good things, but we actually want to stand for great things, right? And not just about bad things. And an offense needs to have a positive message to accomplish the broader engagement outside the choir that's going to be fundamentally needed. Just how to massage that message in the different audiences that we have in mind, we don't necessarily know yet. That'll take a lot of trial and error work, but we've got to reach outside the choir in a really aggressive and hopefully good-spirited way, and that's part of the plan. And so while we're fostering that good, we also want to be shutting down the bad ecological practices, so there is a quid pro quo. A whole lot of movement efforts don't really have a quid pro quo. Well, I'm just about championing this good aspect, but that didn't really end up affecting what Exxon does, right? We're looking for a quid pro quo, and that's important, right? And another major point is that the mindset of an ecological civilization needs to be one that really represents a vibrant circular economy, something that feels good that you want to live in, right? And a lot of work has been done on that, particularly out of this think tank in France, the Thomas Piketty group, right? And they, I think, are ready and willing, as are the Club of Rome, Earth for All people, to be able to show that low-impact living can be full of opportunities where we can learn well and live well. And so a lot of work has been done on that kind of stuff. So in conclusion to these introductory remarks on this initiative, this campaign, we already know that the hour's late, right? And we question ourselves, how do we make a meaningful difference, right? When the world is effectively just going off a cliff, right? And to me, the answer to that is we've got to go big. We've got to have a major plan. We have got to have roadmaps that show how this plan is going to be enacted. And we need to take the offense and go on the offense, all right? And the time to do that, of course, is in fact now. And so we've identified these 5 kind of important system changes and the targeting of the G20. It's a darn good start. I think it's a really solid start to a better world, right? And we've identified these major campaign tactics or approaches from the bottom up and the top down and the lawsuits, all surrounded by a powerful public relations campaign, right? And so the PR campaign will be saying essentially that this is the path to a joyous ecological civilization. And with that, we hope to be able to build the ranks and the people power, which gives us the political power to make things change, right? And the PR campaign will be saying, look, this effort will be stopping the habitat destruction. It will be stabilizing global warming. And this could be our legacy. This could be your legacy to your children and grandchildren and future generations, right? And so, in my thinking, when the bulk of humanity really views the world in deep reverence to nature's needs, then we'll really know that we've won. When the bulk of humanity really begins to recognize that we humans, in fact, are nature, and that separation is, in fact, an illusion, then we know that we will win. So that's the gist of the idea. And I want to thank you all for inviting me here today and for coming out to hear this. Thank you. right, I'm ready for any tough questions that you got out there, you know. Or not, you know.
I've got a question.
Shoot.
I'm curious.
Who are you? Have you been here before?
Hello, I'm Kathleen.
Ms. Kathleen Gildred.
Yes, hi. I live here. So you've laid out these other efforts
Yeah.
that are similar to what you're doing.
Yes.
Do you see any possibility of working together with those other organizations?
Well, that's why in November, which is not that far away, I've already proposed to them that Foundation Earth, my sort of boutique environmental group, would host a gathering in Turkey when they're all going to be there anyways.
Yeah.
Right. And because they know, you know, they've done their homework. They know about it. They may not know in sufficient detail, particularly the new Piketty plan that came out. I read an article in the Guardian, right, on it, and said, wow, that's interesting. I want to read the executive summary next. Well, the summary was 22 pages long, you know, with a lot of graphs, you know, laying out details. And I thought, well, that's a good sign,
Yeah.
right?
Especially since you're in different continents, and if you were to somehow work together, it would make it that much more powerful if you could all work together on this.
Well, we have to work together, or we're not going to get. It's only through collaboration and camaraderie that we're going to kind of save the day, right? Which means save ourselves, but save the web of life, because there is no saving ourselves without saving the web of life. And so, as I mentioned, the partnership with existing networks and coalitions is really fundamental to what we're doing, and we've done a lot of outreach to quite a number of the names that I've met. And last September, at the New York Climate Week, you know, just before the UN General Assembly meeting in New York City, there are major meetings there, and we had a session there with the Club of Rome people and the Great Transition Campaign people, and One Earth out of Southern California with Justin Winters and other people. So that we're working on that collaboration, absolutely.
Great. I keep thinking about, hi, I'm Nicole. I keep thinking about the offenders, like the biggest corporate offenders that you sort of mentioned or alluded to. And I start to think about AI and how that plays into, the environment, and wondering, is there a way to get to the companies that are those AI companies sooner rather than later, to have them become involved?
Yeah, I'll repeat the questions in case it isn't getting picked up for the live stream. The AI companies, you know, they are wanting hideous amounts of electrons, right, to power that burgeoning industry, right, and so water, and so 3 years ago when I started thinking out this package of activities, that wasn't on the radar screen the way it is now, but it is on the radar screen. And the data center fights actually gives us an organizing opportunity, because the surveys really show that people across the political spectrum are really irritated about a lot of these data centers and whatnot, and the water that they use and the damage that they represent to their own communities, right? And so that gives us an organizing. In terms of getting to the top people of those companies, a subset of them we will be able to. There's some that really don't want regulation of AI, the CEOs of a couple of them, and there's a couple of them that really say we damn well better have some serious regulation, or this could be the end of life on planet Earth, you know. And so we haven't thought it through sufficiently. We haven't begun to reach out to those groups yet, but we know that we need to.
Thank you.
So, what aspect of this, trying to form this question best I can, I think human overpopulation is a big part of the problem. And does this, what we're talking about here, we're going on, 8 billion plus people, and are you in any way addressing overpopulation and population growth into what you're doing, and maybe even lobbying to get law against too many?
The question is really about the numbers of people on planet Earth, right? And 8 billion plus going to 9, 10, 11, 12. At this point, they think we may level off around 10, but 10 billion people all wanting to have an overconsumption and wasteful lifestyle is absolute death to planet Earth. And so we all know that. So how do we grapple with that? I'd say that some of the best thinking on that, and it is thoughtful, thought out in some of the plans that I've mentioned, but in particular, the Club of Rome's book. There's a book called Earth for All that goes into this, has a particular chapter on it, and they deal with it largely around the issue of women's empowerment. And women's empowerment is known, and there's a lot of studies and statistics around that, that the more you sort of undercut patriarchy and supplement women's empowerment, then the numbers also shift as well, right? And so, yes, numbers matter to me. If I had a magic wand, I'd say let's over some period of time humanistically get back to about 3 billion, and then let's assess what number might be appropriate given the carrying capacity at that point in time of a majorly damaged planet, right? Carrying capacity of the planet matters, right? And so we have overshot the planet's carrying capacity, right? And we need to get back to have that multiple generation, long-term survivability for life on Earth. And so that does have to be grappled with.
What do you think the planet's carrying capacity is?
Well, there are studies that would say that it's a billion or less. Some would say 500 million. But to me, we don't really need to cross that bridge yet. Let's humanistically get quite a bit back and then make more definitive decisions with the data we have at that point in time.
From my research, it's about 3.9 billion people.
Yeah,
Versus
3.9 billion is one number.
But that's
3
with-
billion is
that's with
another.
current technology, right? So
Yeah.
what's the 80-20 of who's making the most problems? It seems like it's more heavily involved in the heavy industry.
Well, and that's why overconsumption reduction has to be a major component of this. I wouldn't want to see the significance of numbers be cast to the side, but on the other hand, the Piketty plan out of France really says, look, some of these changes aren't going to be easy for people. It's going to require a change in lifestyles, but they have run the numbers on overconsumption reduction and whatnot, and they ran the numbers from the climate models on if this set of things happened, we could maybe stabilize, they say, at 1.9 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, right? Still a very scary number, but far better than what's business as usual is going to get us, right? And so they actually, in their numbers, they have something called a World Sovereign Fund. The sovereign funds, Norway has one, it's filled up with oil revenues. Saudi Arabia has a sovereignty fund, right? Bernie Sanders, to my knowledge, has proposed one for the United States where that fund would be filled up with AI profits, But those sovereignty funds could actually operate like a universal basic income, so that people are kind of guaranteed to be able to survive with dignity at some level, to be able to pay their, feed their family, pay their bills, and maybe even save a little bit for, braces on the kids' teeth or whatever is needed, or a nice vacation from time to time, right? That's a dignified level of living that everybody deserves to have, right? And so overconsumption reduction is absolutely, but the Piketty study says that most people on the planet's income would actually double, right? Now, of course, the ultra-rich wouldn't, right? And the World Sovereignty Fund that they propose would be filled up initially from taxing the ultra-rich. But that money, interestingly, would be used to buy stocks. Hopefully not stocks that are damaging the planet, right? And the revenues, the ongoing revenues of those stocks keeps that pot of money in there. And out of that, a kind of universal basic income could come out of it. Those are some of the ideas that have been thought through, and in some cases in great detail. Yes, ma'am.
So, as our current political climate demonstrates, the people in power are not very willing to relinquish it. They are very much into the capitalist model of overconsumption, especially for the people who are now trying to position AI in a religious, technocratic overlords to the rest of the population. How do we get beyond that?
Yeah, no, the question, of course, is about the current political dynamics of an administration here in the United States that is trying to basically foster the short-term profit overconsumption ethic, right? And that kind of a heading towards fascist overlord world, is happening in many places around the planet, right? And so that's the political reality of the moment, all right? And we can't have a blind eye to that. We don't have the political power or the financial power to grapple with that, so we have to organize the people power, and that's what this campaign is really about. When I talk about getting to a $500 million pot of money, that's not financial power and global dynamics, but it's enough to make a lot of noise if you're smart with the use of that money. And that's what we were able to do at Rainforest Action Network, right, with our full page ads in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and whatnot. And it was a strategy of being able to, as they say, punch above your weight, right? And so the political dynamics is dire, and so we have to get out there and try to rally people to a better story, right? They're going to continue to use a fear-based approach to make people want to be more accepting of kind of a dictatorial world, and we know that's the case. But on the other hand, we've got a better story to tell. And if we do it right, we're going to broaden our ranks enormously. People are leaving both major political parties in the United States to become called independents, right? That gives them the latitude to be more thinking people in many respects, instead of ideologues to one system or another. And so we've got to build upon that. It won't be easy, but when the tough gets going, the tough get going.
Gary, I'm curious about the economic system. Like, we're based on an economic system that is considered to be like industrial growth, and growth has been, the capitalist system has been around for
Right.
centuries now. I'm wondering if you have a sense of like, what would an ecological economy,
Yeah.
how would it work? What would it look like?
Yeah, the question is around the overall current economic system, the economic model, right? And its growth for the sake of growth. But as the famed writer Edward Abbey, who wrote The Monkey Wrench Gang, among other books, like to say, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell, right? It's not a good economic system. I know conceptually how to ecologize capitalism and make it tolerable to a living planet, right? In economic speak, that has to do with internalizing externalities, internalizing pollution externalities. But it's not really about internalizing them into the profit equation. It's really about getting rid of them, banning them, ending the bad activities. And that's a lot about what our campaign is about. And so the subsidy reduction is a shift in the economic model toward what one might call a true cost economy. In the field of ecological economics, if you don't allow people to profit by externalizing the pollution, then you have what's called either a full cost economy or a true cost economy. And I don't actually think that that economy is a good long-term economic model myself. On the other hand, we've got to grapple with where we're at right now, and we've got to limit major damage quickly and buy time to look at other economic models. A lot of work actually, again, coming out of France, but then broadened to much of the world and formed a partnership with ecological economic thinkers around the planet. And I knew many of them. Herman Daly was known as the father of ecological economics, and wrote the book for it. He worked in the environmental department at the World Bank for a while when I was getting arrested, protesting the World Bank, right? But we got to be really quite good friends because he wasn't giving out the wrong loans that were destroying the Amazon. He was trying to correct the World Bank, unsuccessfully, but good for him for trying. So there are ways to ecologize capitalism and limit the damage. It's not, in my mind, a good long-term model for planet Earth. But we certainly know that as long as you can profit by hurting the Earth, it's going to keep happening. And so we have to grapple with that. And that's going to mean additional regulation, and the forces that be in the right-wing circles right now are deregulation people. They don't want anybody telling them what to do because it upsets their short-term profits. Well, we know that, and we're simply going to have to fight the fight for greater regulations based on the ecological needs of nature, right? And so if we can begin tens of millions into hundreds of millions into a couple of billion people supporting us in these 20 biggest economies eventually, I think we'll have the power to begin to change that economic system in terms of eliminating a lot of the environmental destruction that it does. It's foot on the throat of nature, so to speak. And that gives us time to look at other major economic models that will emerge in the subsequent decades.
Yeah, the thing that I struggle with, that even in the best case scenario where we get all of the companies and corporations to include the cost of hurting nature into their balance sheets and income statements and really have it be a piece of the calculation of profits, really basically accounting for all of it, right? That would be amazing by itself. Now, if we think about, and this is what I struggle to understand, is because innovation requires a certain level of profit and growth, otherwise there's no innovation. If we were to just have an economic system that comes down to zero and there's no profit, there's no innovation. And it's, for me, it's hard to believe that our civilization or our species even would come to a point of deciding that innovation will stop completely and we're going to only live with what's available. Basically, we wouldn't be storing materials. Without making this too complicated, but I just wanted to share that I have a hard time imagining like what kind of economic system would we need to have, or would we be able to have that would not involve like a zero innovation where we stop evolution. Do you know what I mean? It's like you said you wanted challenging questions. This is like something that I've been struggling with for years, and I remember being on a Zoom call with an economist who works at Harvard, and at the end of the call I asked the same question, and I said to her, so what level of growth would we need to have? Like, what's the smallest amount of growth that we would need to have for the economy to still be innovating and still be running?
Right.
And she said the truth is that it would be zero growth, meaning no innovation. I'm not saying that that's the answer.
Yeah.
But that's
No,
what
I mean,
heard,
the no growth movement out of France, right? Or that's not quite the name I'm thinking of right now, but at any rate, well, there's post growth, no growth. At any rate, there's a lot of thinking about growth, and people tend to fall into two camps there. Those who want unlimited, unbridled growth, and those who want no growth. And I wrote a definition of selective growth that was my approach, and that has to do why don't we grow where we need to grow? We need to innovate around ecological economics. We need to innovate and getting there. We need to innovate around regenerative agriculture. We need to take some of our technologies, like the stupid cell phone, right, and redesign it and innovate such that it fits a circular economy and that every component of it can be reused, right, which is not the case right now. Right, there's a lot of room for innovation. So I'm for selective growth where we need to grow. Don't we want to grow our personalities, or you know, if you're a teenager, you want to grow your muscles. You know, there's a lot of growth, intellectual growth that, you know, there's a lot of room for growth in that sense.
Growing of medical cures, growing of things that actually benefit
Yeah,
humanity
yeah, and
nature.
and a lot of that's going to take continued innovation, right? And so. There are things, though, like the precautionary principle. Some innovator may have some technology that might have vast pollution externalities that we don't quite understand yet. And when in doubt, we've got to play it safe. So will that squelch some innovation? I hope it does, if the precautionary principle needs to be invoked, right? And that's the level of sort of kind of wisdom and common sense that has to be employed. But actually, you know, your question was about, you know, is this plan going to squelch a hell of a lot of innovation? I hope not, because I mentioned the idea of a vibrant circular economy. I typically like to add a few other adjectives, like a deep green, vibrant circular economy, right? That's the one that I want, and that allows for a lot of regeneration of the world's soils and the world's forests and the oceans. And such. And so that's the economic model. Just how to get there from where we are now, not clear. But we can reduce a hell of a lot of damage. We can get our foot off the throat of nature, and that, as I said, buys time. Yes, ma'am.
I've had about 8 questions since you started talking, and I think it's so fantastic. I took a lot of notes, and if it were just straightforward greed that we are against, that would be bad enough. You know, the short-term, you know, or the new countries that are just coming to be second or first world countries that are already just wanting to go crazy with cars and everything. But then what about the elements that are deliberately trying to destroy us? The chemtrails and 5G and all those things that are their point is to make havoc with us. And then what about this current administration that is deliberately undoing what we've been gradually, with effort over the last decade, trying to do for ecology and environment, and now it's being undone.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, I mean, even if it were just as straightforward greed, that's already being, I mean, it just seems like, you know, no one cares about their own grandchildren, is what gets me.
Well, yeah, I know we've got the problem of greed, but that's not all we have to grapple with. That's your point, is that there's actually some damage doers out there that want to keep us suppressed in one way or another. And we've got to fight those fights. We've got to continue to expose them. We've got to outmaneuver them. And that takes getting the truth out to greater numbers of people, particularly outside the choir, and building the ranks. And that's a lot of what we have in mind for this campaign effort. There's no guarantee that this could be successful, but we know that if we don't try, it certainly won't be successful. And one thing that we do know from the last 50 years of work, a lot of heroic work that's been done on many of the different issue areas has been insufficient. So incrementalism didn't get the job done, you know, and that's why I keep saying we've got to take the offense and we've got to go bigger.
It seems like a lot of the innovators have been suicided, so to speak. I mean, I saw a documentary about all these innovators that think they're going to make big money with their invention, whether it's a new energy source or a healing product, and those are the ones that suddenly mysteriously have car
No,
accidents.
there's serious concern about
So we
people
need to
trying to
get this
disrupt
together.
intervention and positive change. And you alluded to some of the, you know, your phrase, I think, was, well, that's at current technology, meaning there will be emerging technologies, you know, and that I believe has a lot of promise, but it also invokes a lot of fear for those that are trying to file those patents that might get offed because it would undercut the oil industry or the whatever, the automobile industry. You know, some of these things are thought of as conspiracy theories, but that doesn't mean that the conspiracy theorists are wrong. In some cases, they're right? And we've heard more recently about a number of scientists that have disappeared that were connected to some of the NASA programs and whatnot, you know. And so, yes, that's out there. It's in that respect, it's an ugly world out there, but it's also full of a lot of good people and promise, and a lot of people that are kind of sitting on the fence, wanting to have agency to be a part of the solution, but most groups don't present a way for them to connect. We would focus a lot on that. We would try to have, you know, as I mentioned, hundreds of volunteers at these 10 major gatherings, you know, virtually every month for the next several years on the ground as ambassadors to this plan, you know, talking about how, look, we better have a plan to get to a better world, an ecological civilization, and here are 5 changes that do a lot to get us there, you know, and so educating the media about that and saying, you know, we want the media to bring those questions to the captains of industry and to the high elected officials of these nation-state governments. We have about 200 nation-states across the planet, but initially we're going to focus on the G20, which isn't exactly 20 nation-states, because one of the G20 is all of Europe, right? But you can get a lot done when you get organized, and we just simply have to get organized. It'll be a tough fight in many respects, but it's also meant to be a good spirited fight with a positive message ultimately.
Randy, you talked a lot about the political end of the spectrum. What about the religious end of the spectrum? Like, I was thinking about like Catholicism and the Vatican and how they promote life, and they want, you know, how that all fits into living in the earth and everything. Is there anyone on that end of the spectrum that has expressed any sort of interest in what you're doing?
Yeah, I have a laundry list of audiences. I think it's on a sheet of paper here in this bag. But one of them, of course, is the major religions. And, you know, some good news from the Catholic front was the previous Pope put out the encyclical, Laudato Si, right? An encyclical, for those who don't know, is a major statement, like a policy paper from the Catholic Church. And that was Pope Francis, right? Named after St. Francis of Assisi, the nature mystic priest, right? And so and the current Pope is, you know, big on that issue as well, and that's a good sign. But there have been behind the scenes meetings of a lot of the major religions around nature's needs. Yeah. And there's a woman named Mary Evelyn Tucker who set up a database for the major religions and the environmental dictates in their own documents, right? So what is it that's said in the Muslim world versus the Greek Orthodox world versus the Catholic world versus the whatever world, you know? And so there's a lot of footwork that's been done on that. And in the sense that I said, you know, we would use the convening power and the money that we raise to pull people together. There are already annual meetings at the Vatican on the planet's needs and ongoing work with that.
They certainly have $500 million.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's a lot of money there, you know.
So let's say everything falls into place. Funding, the volunteers.
Yeah.
What then are the first concrete steps that you'd want to see? I mean, I'm hearing the word ecological economy. What does that mean? I mean, concrete.
Well, I mentioned a few of them in the talk,
Obviously, I missed that.
but to reiterate some of that, we know what gatherings we would have. Later this year, you know, we'd have this gathering in Turkey at the UN climate meeting with the major groups to begin to put this forth and to develop the camaraderie that we hope will emerge from their different efforts. But even if they didn't, and they mostly wanted to fight for their own efforts, that's okay with me for the moment. because their efforts are really well thought out and mostly on target with what I laid out today. And they have a few other additives, like one of them has a lot more focus, as I mentioned, on women's empowerment. Well, damn good, because we need that, right? And so, you know, some of the efforts initially would be getting those particular groups some of the money, because to be honest, most of those groups right now don't have much wind in their sail. They have done the intellectual work, but you haven't heard of them because they don't have a lot of wind in their sail. But with some money, they at least have a chance to get some wind in their sail with their own constituencies and perhaps even globally, right? And then we would host a number of small half-day sessions with influential people and funders and whatnot that we have kind of on paper thought out, right? And so we would begin to launch the public relations campaign to begin to refine the message. I drafted some full-page ads for the Financial Times, and I handed them to the darling of the climate change movement's media advisor, public relations advisor, a guy named John Marshall, who lives in Connecticut. And he read through my draft ad, and he looked at me and he said, "This just simply won't work." And I thought, damn, I did the best I could to really say it clearly and powerfully and even emotionally. And he says, "Because you're not selling abundance. And you've got to sell abundance." And I looked at him and I said, "I don't know how to tell people that we've got to get our foot off the throat of nature as a step of abundance in the short term. I don't know how to do that." Well, in a sense, that's what the Piketty plan out of France does that very well. You know, in the sense that their plan radically reduces overconsumption, radically deals with the carbon emissions and the carbon sequestration that needs to be improved upon, and has the graphs on how we would stabilize at 1.9 degrees centigrade, right? And they say that that would happen where most of the people on the planet would double their income while they had better health care, better education, and more time off. All of that happening while we stop the destruction of habitats and we stabilize global warming. That's a package of abundance. But your question is, well, what would I do if this money gets assembled in the short term?
I mean, like, what would the sources of energy be? Obviously, we're talking about, our foot on the neck of nature, because, environmental depletion is using things like fossil fuel or deforestation. So what would the alternative be?
Well, the alternative in terms of getting to 100% renewable, forget about AI for the moment and the major dilemma that presents in terms of energy needs, but cast it aside for the moment. And what I was saying early on was saying, look, if you actually not only leveled off all global energy at a certain level, but then you started getting rid of a lot of the stupid stuff that we use energy for, major energy, because we're in an emergency and we can't afford it, right? If we cut it in half, if you needed to get to 100% renewable energy, if you only have to go half the distance, you're going to get there a lot quicker, right? So some of the alternatives are described in that fashion, right? That would get us to the alternative of being in a world of 100% renewable energy, right? And so, and if a lot of people are employed with jobs that do damage to a living planet, it's got to stop at some point. So how do you grapple with their needs? What are the new forms of employment, right? Some of these plans have a lot to say about that, and it's already in writing with details, and it has to do including the concept of a universal basic income to allow people the dignified life on top, as a foundation, and then their employment's on top of that. Right, and so there's a lot of conservation jobs that are going to be needed. If we want to reforest if we shift to agroecology globally, that's more labor intensive. And those people need a dignified wage, right? And so that's the alternative. You know, it's a lot of employment, but it's employment that regenerates the livability of planet Earth.
Randy?
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna kind of two points here.
Yes, but I'm cutting you off to get Diane, and then I'm going to come right to you.
Okay, that cut me off.
Fair enough.
I'll be quick, but I just wanted to address, I mean, there's a, you know, none of the solutions are easy, but there's been a tremendous amount of thought that's been made by some people I've had the privilege to work with, some of them that Randy's had the privilege to work with, some of them at the more grassroots level, but many at the highest level of, you know, like the German Federal Environment Agency and, you know, the Fraunhofer Institute, and these really huge, you know, given a lot of thought of, there are solutions, there are gaps, for sure, like where we can get to like 8, you know, I mean, even in 100% renewable energy, where we've come an awful long way since
Yeah.
Randy and I first met, when no nonprofit would take this on, and I was like, I'll start a nonprofit that'll take it on, like who the hell am I, but, and you know, Randy helped to it catalyze, I mean, we really catalyzed a movement, that then ended up, you know, also in some policy, which was cool, but, you know, how we get to 100%, you know, getting to 80, we figured out, like, getting to 80 is, like, pretty easy, getting to 100,
Yes.
and then across sectors, yes, there are some gaps, but there's we know, there's so much that we know that hasn't been implemented, in part because there's many reasons for that, but one of them is there's an attention gap, which is why I think the PR campaign is important, and that PR campaign better be smart, because boy, is PR with all, you know, the bots and, you know, that's getting is getting more complex all the time, but how do we keep people's attention? Which raises a question for me, which I don't want to cut you off, but, you know, I wanted to address what you had to say, that it's a good question. Like, how are we going to do this? There's a lot that we do know, that there's a lot that needs to be implemented, and it's true that groups right now are kind of down on their heels a bit, a lot of them, because there's been so much political strife around the world, and it's hard to maintain attention for funding. And on that point, one of the things that's been on my mind a lot in the last 8 years, since this region had its first really big mega fire that made the 1993 fire that was in this area seem quaint. And then, you know, we had the 2025 explosion, and then we've had, you know, Lahaina, and we've had, you know, the campfire on the same day that the Santa Monica Mountains burned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Canada was on fire. Vermont, they were on fire. You know, so we've had these big increasing levels of disaster. Is how to maintain people's attention on the priorities that you're talking about, and also how to not wipe out in a second, you know, or in a day, the gains that your plan so valiantly wants to accomplish. Get a mega fire, and then all of a sudden California's last few years of carbon efforts that have been world leading and are wiped out, because so where does that, is that, in every campaign you have to create a limit, because you can't do everything. So you're already planning a very ambitious plan. Does this is, and your ambitious plan is kind of where I was living for the previous 15 years of my life, and then I'm like, you know, there's this big, like, I'm eating sand, to put it in surfer terms. Like, whoa, what do I do? So where does that kind of growing existential crisis of these climate, it's not just climate, it's how we've also built out our, you know, neighborhoods. And how does that can wipe out your plan, and also both in terms of its emissions, and also in terms of its attention and resources, how is that going to be a sister, a sister effort? Is that going to be incorporated? Do you not know yet, because you got to get everybody in the room and figure this stuff out? I'm just wondering how you're thinking.
I'm not quite sure I get your question. State it again.
So my question is, how you've got your 5 pillars of what you're trying to achieve. There's this thing in the room like mega fires. There's other disasters too, but let's just take mega fires.
That will distract our attention.
Distract your attention, and also wipe out the gains of the climate.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
of
yeah.
the renewable energy and energy conservation work and cleaning up they can wipe the gains out very quickly because
Right.
of these disasters. So, are you planning to incorporate this solving for this problem in your campaign, or have it just an awareness of it and be, coordinate with efforts that are trying to do that?
In some
How are you
cases,
thinking about that?
in some cases, these sort of disasters are going to wipe out gains. In other cases, the disasters will be tough on the people, but might radically reduce carbon emissions if an entire nation state's grid goes down for a long period of time,
Right.
which, is likely to happen in quite a few nation states around the planet over the next decade or two. And in some cases, a disaster becomes an opportunity to build the ranks. And I liken it to the ambulance chaser mentality, right? Capitalizing on the grief of people, so to speak. To say, well, it was said that these fires would happen, and here they are. And, the politicians you supported clearly didn't grapple with it sufficiently. So, here's yet a new plan to get behind that might do a better job. But part of the answer is as you mentioned, is we don't know yet, and there'll have to be some experimenting, particularly getting the message of this campaign outside the choir in ways that they find tolerable.
Yes.
So, but Mark.
It's funny because almost exactly, but I'm going a little deeper here because I have a background in psychology and also in media.
Yeah.
So a lot of public opinion runs on what I call narratives. Okay, and a lot of those narratives are also based on ego, individual ego, sometimes even societal ego.
Yeah.
So my question was I want to give this example real quick. In the movie Independence Day, we have the aliens attacking the Earth. Now all of a sudden, all the egos are gone, and all the nations come together to battle off these aliens. Okay? So we are the aliens. But how can we get that closer where we change the narrative to exactly what you're talking about, to, what do you call it, ecological economy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or ecological civilization.
So will it take a major disaster where, humans have a tendency to be, if they're cornered, they're going to do something. But
Yeah.
we don't want them to get cornered. We don't want to be, like you said in the very beginning, we don't want to wait till the last minute. Why didn't we do something sooner?
Right.
So my question is really, how do we change the narrative to get people on board, online with this idea in a very maybe dramatic sense that's real?
Yeah. Well, most social change movements, and certainly the environmental movement, the major players in those movements will often piss and moan and complain that they find it hard to raise money for the public relations and the media work. And that's really quite true. And that's why our thinking is that at least half of our money would go into the media work, to keep pounding this sort of more positive story. But again, a quid pro quo kind of story. We've got to stop the bad as we foster the good. Both have to happen simultaneously. And, we've just got to get out there and do it.
Well, okay, on a psychological basis, media is great, but how do I get, say, somebody who thinks that their normal life is ruining the planet?
Well, a lot of people think their normal life is an okay life and don't want to see it get more expensive, and yet they actually know right now it is getting more expensive. So the business as usual model is not even allowing them that normal life, right? And so how do you counteract, things getting more expensive in the short term? As I mentioned with the plan out of France, theirs actually doubles people's incomes, and that grapples with that issue for 90 to 95% of the people on planet Earth, right? And the numbers and the graphs are in their plan, right?
Is it that their income is increased, or that their buying power is also increased?
I think actually their income is increased, but I'm not quite sure.
But where does that come from?
From the 1% that's in power that doesn't want to let it go.
Yeah, ego.
I talked about it a little bit earlier, but one of their concepts is a world sovereignty fund.
Which means?
But the Saudis are using their sovereign fund
Yeah.
to do the worst stuff possible.
Correct. And so this would pilot a sovereign fund that would do the good things, right? And it would be initially funded with enough money to buy 10% of all global stocks,
Where would that money come from to buy the stock?
taxing the ultra rich.
BlackRock.
And the numbers have been run on just how much, and whatnot.
So that would happen on a national level.
No, global, and and the 20-page executive summary didn't really give me a sense of how they would make that happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, who's the global tax?
Right, and so I wrote to India last week to a guy that I know who set up what's called a digital wallet for every Indian that has a cell phone. And the digital wallet, when the government has subsidies, say, to small farmers, that money goes into a pot and is dispersed directly to the small farmers via their phone. That's already in place. That's already in place. So I wrote to him and I basically said, I happen to know that you know a lot of billionaires in India and they like your work. And so why don't you ask them to throw 2 or 3 billion into a world sovereign fund? But that money, that 3 billion, would then get dispersed to every person in India in equal amounts or something over a certain amount of time. Because the money came from India, so let's let it go to India. But basically to prove that the concept isn't far away and that it works.
$3 billion would give each Indian, what, $2?
Yeah, but my point is to show that the concept can be actually done with existing technology.
Well, they're moving very closer to a central bank digital currency smart coin.
But you did do the math right, because India is about 1.4 billion. So it's about $2 per Indian. Yes, ma'am.
So there is a ballot proposition that's coming up in November, taxing the rich. And not too long ago, right after the primary elections, we all got a mailer from Gavin, from, all of the progressive
Yeah.
Elected people
Statewide?
statewide. This is California
The billionaire
initiative.
tax.
And they were all to a one. All these people who I believe in, they were all advocating not to tax the rich.
That's because everybody's going to Texas and Florida.
That's
Right,
correct.
they'll leave this economy
has to
and
be
then that's gonna
national.
harm
It's already
our,
happening.
Absolutely.
Right, it'll
Look at
harm our
Elon.
bonds
Yeah.
and our
Yeah. No,
our
there's,
pensions.
I think that the taxing the rich sounds like a simple solution to people who haven't thought it through. And I'm not saying it should or shouldn't be done. I think at some level and in the right way it should be done. But that hasn't really emerged yet. I do know that Gavin's team has been thinking about better ways to do it than the current ballot initiative, according to them. And I meant last week to actually look up the particulars on that, but also have a friend named Michael Schumann, who's one of the best thinkers about bioregional economies and trapping money locally. And he has a set of really cogent thoughts on how to do it the right way. But it's not the only way to necessarily accomplish what we think would be accomplished from taxing the rich.
But I'm sure it will appeal, just the very name of it, tax the rich. There are going to be a lot of people who will vote for that.
Yeah.
Because that seems like maybe that will level the playing field or the buying field.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
No, they'll
I'll go
just,
to
it'll,
Texas
it'll
and
force
Florida.
them into
But
it.
even with ballot initiatives, like in the state of California, the rich know how to defend what they have, and they know how to hire really experienced, public relations and organizing efforts to defeat things like that. So we'll see how it turns out. But I know way back over here, there's some people. Any questions from the?
Peanut gallery?
Yeah, I started to say that, and I held my tongue.
In that moment, I was just thinking you can't tax a trust account, but no, I'm just listening. I missed some of the beginning, so I don't want to be redundant. But thank you. My name is Susan, by the way.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
I don't know if you touched on the insects and the problem that we're having with the.
I didn't, but I'm actually quite glad you brought up the insects. And because I think about that a lot. I happen to know that the major studies show that, and a lot of people just don't know this, the insect world is down about 70% globally. That's what the studies are showing. And not just in places where there's massive industrial agriculture. The Black Forest of Germany, they're down 70%, right? And so that's scary stuff, because that's getting lower on the food chain. And that's why one of the major planks is about habitat protection and the conversion of industrial agriculture to ecological farming globally. Because the number one cause of the extinction of species right now is industrial agriculture, right? And so we are definitely, at least I am definitely thinking on behalf of the insects.
Yes, and I think a lot of people just don't know.
No, they don't.
That that of course elephants are important, of course the larger animals are important, and we're important, but they don't perceive an insect.
That's right.
But actually, without
They
the
do a
insects,
little
the
bit
birds
around
can't eat.
pollinators like bumblebees, right?
Yeah,
But
we-
that's not enough to get the job done to really change things.
And because of social media now, I think a lot of people do know that bumblebees are important, but they don't realize that the other insects, they just,
Yeah.
if they're not there and they're down 70% now, and possibly 80 or 90%, then the birds can't eat, and when the birds aren't, and then the birds deplete, and so
Yeah.
forth. And
No, it's a cascading
it's
effect.
a domino effect, and
Yeah.
it's happening fast.
Even lower on the food chain, of course, is phytoplankton in the earth, in the oceans.
Yes, and so.
And I don't know the numbers on that.
And
I'm
they're,
not sure the numbers either, but it is a concern, and I'm also with
Yeah.
the forest U-turn project. I think the insects.
But on the habitat protection, there's a campaign some of you will know about, simply called 30 by 30. And that means protecting 30% of the land mass by the year 2030. That's not very many years away. And actually, there's kind of good news around it, There's been a lot of work done. The Biden administration was fully behind it. The Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, was quite behind it. And more importantly, there's a coalition of nation-state governments. It started with Costa Rica, England, and France, I believe. And it's called the High Ambition Coalition. Well, when has any nation-state ever wanted to be highly ambitious, except perhaps around taxing and political power, right? But this is high ambition around conservation. And the 30 by 30, it actually came out of kind of a nature needs have movement of conservation biologists that I worked with quite closely. In fact, I was chair of the steering committee for the Nature Needs Have coalition for a year when I lived in Washington, D.C. And they did the scientific data, which basically, in simple terms, if you got a unique flora and fauna system, like a valley between some mountains, and it has unique species. If you save 50% of that, you might be able to save 90% of the species. So that's the kind of that's where the nature needs half, right? And half back then, 10 years ago, was a rather bold thing for conservation biologists to say. We need to protect half of the, having protective status, half of the planet, half of every major continent and every major island, half of the oceans, right? Where industrial society cannot assault it directly. And so there's a lot of work that's happened. And when I mentioned that 2 of the 5 system shifts have pretty good roadmaps on detailed strategies on how to get things done, one of them is the nature's needs, right? And the habitat protection. And so 30 by 30 is actually likely to be achieved. It's quite possible, and a lot of other countries are really working towards it. And then it needs to be 40% by 2040 and 50% by 2050, but that gives us another couple of decades to accomplish the goal. So those are things that we have to build upon and popularize, and that would be, one of the 5 major messages in our public relations campaign.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little deeper.
Psychologically?
Sociologically more.
Okay.
So, what I hear you saying is you're trying to create a paradigm shift. Okay, and I keep hearing you say money, 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 money. Okay, do we need to have a global economy paradigm shift? Or do we need to hit a wall and then people start investing in ecological growth?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tough question, I know, but
Well, to an extent, when you can send this long-term signal into a damaging industry like hard rock mining and mining for metal, because you cut the subsidies. How might the subsidies actually be cut? Well, fat chance we could do 100% overnight, right? We don't have magic wands. So it might be in some cases, well, we're going to cut the subsidy 5% a year for 20 years until it's 0, right? Or some people might say, well, in our country, we can do 10% a year over 10 years to cut it. And that supposedly gives industry a chance to readjust and shift. But it sends the long-term signal that this is not a profitable industry. And so money shifts. That's...
Now on a psychological level, again, how do we get the individual, the
Well, but
bourgeoisie to...
it is a psychological level in the sense that it's a financial incentive to do the right thing. And it's a decrease in the financial incentives to do the wrong thing. That's going down while doing the right thing is going up. And so psychologically, sociologically, there's some data that shows that that's real and can happen. Yes?
So, I have so many questions and comments, possibly for a non, but I keep thinking about the US political system as well as the information sphere. I've been involved in this professionally since 1990, trying to change opinions.
Yeah.
I was one of the founders of a group called ARC, launched in 1990 to kind of bring media and music and film stars together with environmentalists to
Right.
bring it to a new audience.
Yeah.
We took 30% of the UK household cleaning products market in 3 months by doing a PR campaign and having like 3 remaining Beatles who never do PR wearing an ARC t-shirt.
Right.
And then we had agents from Unilever, Procter & Gamble start, scientists, fake scientists, coming all the radio talk shows and saying we didn't need to have this. Somehow the rivers in Europe are different than the rivers in biodegradable, whatever. They basically killed the venture.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, like, in this time space, I've seen people who have really kind of like right on good paradigm views about certain things,
Right.
but now don't believe in climate change. Like their minds have been poisoned.
Yeah.
By it's all actually weather manipulation. That's the cause of it, right? So what I'm saying is the two issues is the information sphere. I mean, we've seen massive consolidation in that space for certain political agendas on the planet. You know, you can't talk about genocide or this, that, and the other, right? So it is a rambling question, but you know, the art of war, Sun Tzu says that the only way you can win is you have to know yourself and you have to know your enemy.
Yeah.
Right? So they do these tactics, right? And just having like a lot of people agree with a certain new paradigm position, obviously it's not that simple. We
No.
have reps who are supposed to be the most sort of representative of the grassroots level of communities, right? We have representatives who are up for election every 2 years. They're in a constant cycle. So to have a 20-year plan, how do you do that unless you actually mirror and better the tactics of the enemy, which is to have lobbying in Congress so that, you know, you can have a plan that goes over 20 years.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah.
you've got to match that, and then also in the information sphere, how do you unbung it and clarify it based on all of this? You know, we know that the term conspiracy theory was coined by the CIA to essentially throw untruths in with truths
Right.
to discredit a sort of magic bullet theory of how JFK was killed, right? So they're expert at poisoning the information space.
Yeah.
And they've done an incredibly good job, right? A lot of people who have all kinds of great views believe that these fires were caused by lasers from space or whatever the fuck. You know, I don't know if it's true or not. But so it feels like you have to match what they do
Yeah.
to control politics and powerful
There is
people,
huge weather.
as well as to clarify the truth sphere.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Are we laughing at weather manipulation?
No.
Good.
I'm not laughing at it because
You were.
the
You presented
radars
it that
that were
way.
bombed in the Middle East, it's now raining
No,
in
but-
Iran for the first time in
Well, you
50 years.
presented it that way.
No,
Well,
but
I'm
the way I
saying-
heard it was, some people think that's the only
That's
thing
it.
that does
It's
it.
exclusively
And it's not
that.
the only thing that does it.
Exactly.
It is one slice of
Right.
the pie.
Yes.
And it might be a lot bigger slice than a lot of people know.
Correct.
I think to your point. Because it likely is a bigger slice of the
Yeah,
pie.
I'm saying they
Yeah.
go into this binary camp of it's
Right.
all that, and therefore it's really the billionaires who are trying to persuade us
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
planet is broken, the climate is
Yeah.
broken, because they want to get rich on it from carbon credits, and it's
Yeah.
all nonsense. So people swing in this binary.
Yeah.
Can I just make a comment? Because I study human behavioral science.
A little bit louder.
I study human behavioral science. I know what mirroring is. And so this is only a metaphor. So just a metaphor, not getting into religion or anything, but so as a metaphor, when you're talking, and I've read The Art of War, so as a metaphor, just saying, we don't have to mirror the enemy. As a metaphor saying, God doesn't mirror the devil in order to beat the devil. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We don't have to mirror the devil in order, we don't have to lower
I wasn't
ourselves.
suggesting something mandatory. I'm saying that the reality is that our laws, if you look at any policy that gets enacted as a law, the amount of popular support for it has zero impact on its likelihood of passing Congress. Zero. In multiple studies. You can have 100% popular support, it has no influence on whether that becomes a law. You can have 0%, no influence. So how do you deal with that reality of what actually makes things become law?
And it's a good question. I'm just saying there's more options than just, as a great discussion. And it is a great question. We don't have to lower ourselves to the lower species.
But I don't think lobbying for good is a lowering. If you actually have a
Yeah,
fund,
and let's make a distinction, I think, between, say, mirroring and matching. Matching just means if they've got 20 initiatives out there to mislead the public, we need to have at least 20 initiatives out there to tell the truth. That's a matching. And I think that was the point.
Yeah.
But the mirroring, I understand your point about mirroring.
But
We want to take the high road, not the low road.
But movements like the civil rights movements, those were big enough to overcome the lobbying and the control of the government. So it has to be at least that big.
Yeah.
Although there was also in the halls of Congress and with the president, a very talented figure and his group who were also writing the laws, lobbying for the laws, and telling them, giving them the marching orders with the public, creating the pressure to do so.
Absolutely.
Who are you referring to?
I'm talking about Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I mean, now, look what happened to him. But yes, I think that you're right.
Yeah, but we got some groundbreaking civil rights law that has lasted for the last 60 years, and now there's
We're going backwards now.
yeah, but I'm saying
Yeah.
and so the work is never done,
No.
but at least we get some forward movement.
Wow. That's all I can say, right? Really awesome, Randy. What I didn't say in my introduction is with all the things that you have done and who you are, if anybody is capable of strategizing and pulling off a global plan, it would be you. And so that's why I'm so grateful that you're here today talking about all this. Thank you so much. I'm reminded of Buckminster Fuller, who back in the day, in the 80s, would say, we have 4 billion billionaires who are highly unaware of their good fortune, because we really, if we change, he was talking about changing weaponry to livingry, which is a similar kind of concept. It's like, how can we shift from a world that depletes nature to one that benefits and utilizes nature in a way to feed all of us? So thank you so much. If you want to get anyway, one thing that you don't know is that when I invited Randy to be here today to talk, and I said, Randy, I have a lot of air miles, so I could buy you a ticket on my air miles. I said, I need your full name and I need your birthday. His birthday is July 11th.
Happy birthday.
I finally made it to 112.
Yay. So as many of you know what I'm most famous for,
The birthday.
I'll be right back if you want to talk among yourselves.
All right, thank you all. And let's just break into the frivolity of a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
I just want to report that the sky has changed about 6 major ways, major times, where it would be totally different. And I look up 10 minutes later, oh my God, it's totally different.
Patterns of nature.
Yeah, it really is happening.